hello everyone who was joining us today from the Netherlands here at the X-Dream Events platform. Thank you so much for being with us here in the session about workflow orchestration with John from Squared Paper. John, thank you so much for being with us, connected from the UK. Please introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself and let us know who is Squared Paper.
So yes, I'm John McNamara-Dale. I'm one of the co-owners and directors of Squared Paper. And who are Squared Paper? Well, we're a small company. We basically are here to help join systems together, like joining hardware and software, linking things together to simplify control and management and monitoring of things. Basically, we call ourselves broadcast software integrators. So like the traditional system integrator would come in and connect all your equipment together with cables, we will come in and connect it with software instead.
John, could you tell us a little bit about Squared Paper as a company, as a team? So about, who are the people within your team? What is the company's history and the background?
So the company was formed about 5-6 years ago now, and so we're still a smallish company. There are 7 of us currently, but we've all got many years of experience in the broadcast industry. For example, I previously worked at 2 different playout activities, as has Spencer and the other founders. We've got people who used to work for the BBC. We've got people from audio companies, etc. So we've got a lot of experience in the broadcast and media industry. So we're not just a software company. We're a software company who really understands the big picture about what a broadcaster or service provider is trying to do.
Your main product is Busby. What is Busby? Is it a product? Is it more?
Well, it's difficult to describe it simply as a product. It's more of a toolkit or a kit of parts which we use to, we call it our enterprise integration toolkit. So it's a collection of microservices and software applications which you can use to build a system which might be controlling workflows, it might be doing some monitoring, it might be managing streaming platforms. And it's a way of connecting a lot of other third-party systems in and integrating them all together using this kit of parts. So that's what it is, basically.
So is it fair to say it's an integration platform, an integration system?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you could call it that. It's got a lot of third-party integrations and it knows a lot about the broadcast and media world.
So, and when we talk about integrations, then I always have in mind there's something in the middle and there are various other pieces around or below or above, however you want to draw that picture. Here at the screen you already have one that somehow shows a little bit the architecture of Busby. Could you please elaborate on this a little bit? So, because I think someone who is seeking for an integration and something that is connecting elements or even many elements in his facility wants to understand what this integration software is exactly.
So the way Busby works, as you can kind of see on this diagram, is what we do is we create what are called microservices for any little bits of software or systems that we need to integrate with, or indeed for the internal business logic and management inside Busby. Instead of the old kind of traditional way of connecting microservices is to simply, via an API or an HTTP connector, to connect each microservice to all the other microservices. But that can just easily get into a huge mess of not knowing what's going on. So what we've done is we're using an enterprise service bus, which is, in this case, we've made a lightweight wrapper around RabbitMQ, because that's a really fast messaging bus and it's simple. All of our microservices then connect to that bus, and there are, in terms of the architecture, there are some key services. For example, what we call the directory service, and that is the the service which manages all of the redundancy and the active standby state. And you also, out of the box, get things like the configuration and the admin microservices, and they all come out of the box. They're all connected. Imagine basically those blue boxes that would be your, if you just install Busby out of the box, you would have all those boxes in blue set up straight away.
So I would have the bus, I would have the configuration services, the configuration user interfaces, the general directory service, so that things can talk with each other. But that very moment, I would have like a, let's say, empty system that does nothing, which just sits and waits for something to happen. And obviously, this things to happen is with the surrounding third-party software that you can integrate with. Could you give us some examples what type of software you are integrating with, and also how you do that?
Yes, sure. So a lot of the, so I'll just go through a couple of example use cases, and but a lot of the time it's integrating with things such as transcoders like Vantage or Capella, or automatic QC systems such as Venera or Baton, and we integrate with them via any open APIs which they may have available. We're quite, you know, it doesn't take us long to develop an integration if there's a published API, or sometimes we can work out other ways of integrating. And then use cases for the integrations. It might just be, for example, you have a job management system already in your facility or in your cloud, but it's not able to control a new type of transcoder, which is, say, bought a Capella transcoder. So you might simply use the Busby system just to provide that integration to your job management system, for example.
Now, so here we now have, let's say, the system, we have the integrations, and now I think the question is about what do we build from that? I imagine that typically we are talking about workflows, file-based workflows, as you also mentioned, like transcoders. Could you give us some examples for such workflows and use cases?
Sure. So yeah, file-based workflows is a very popular use case of Busby. So an example may be, you know, preparing content and delivering to video on-demand platforms. And there are other systems which can do those things automatically. But the kind of benefit of using something like Busby is it's very flexible, and you can integrate that with lots of different. It's basically really good at putting in workflows where other systems don't quite fit in. So let's say, I don't know, I could make a workflow in another system to go and transcode my files and upload them to a VOD platform. But the thing about the Busby system is it may, in the process of doing that, you've got to receive the data to create the jobs in the first place. So in this case, it might receive in some schedules from a traffic system. It may then process those schedules to translate them into VOD platform format. Then it may take the schedules, look through, find all the media, gather up some metadata from various third-party APIs, transcode the file, and then upload that to various different destinations.
So that sounds like a quite complex workflow, way more than what we have seen at this screenshot next to me here. So I understood it gets triggered, let's say, with a metadata file that gets then parsed and searched for information that is then again used to trigger, let's call it sub-workflows that are then processing something like a transcode or a quality control. And again, at the end, things are merged and pushed to other third-party systems. You also spoke about schedules. So what I had in mind in the first place have been a workflow, let's say, in a file-based ingest. But when we talk about schedule and video on demand, that also sounds like Busby might apply in the area of processing for VOD publishing or even for any linear TV. Does it?
Yeah, that's definitely true. One of the key things about when we created the workflow system inside Busby, we decided to go down a slightly different route to the other kind of job workflow broadcast management systems that are out there, in that we made it so that the workflow system is not based around media files, it's just based around the concept of a job. And a job could be anything you want. It might be based on a schedule, it may be based on a media file, or maybe a subtitle file, or something like that. So the key thing is, another example use case is where for a national broadcaster, we are taking their linear schedules, which are coming out of their, I think it's omnibus traffic system, quite a legacy traffic system. Then we're then importing those schedules into Busby, and we pass through them. We get the list of programs, and we create a job inside Busby for each program. And then based on lots of rules which we can code into the configuration, we can say, well, if it's, I don't know, the news, then somebody needs to select a template for the graphics that are going to be on there. So basically, you can put in the configuration, the list of programs, and you can have a default like coming up next templates and those kinds of things. And then what you can do is there are tasks for operators to look through, see the list of programs, and well in advance, so maybe 2 to 3 weeks in advance, they can click through and they can assign templates and fill in clips that are going to be promoted on air. And then the day before transmission, when the final copy of the schedule arrives from the traffic system, it is simply transferred into the automation system format, and at the time that it does the transformation, it also pulls in all the new bits of metadata which have been entered by the operators.
John, thanks for this next example. I think we will elaborate on this later on a little bit more and go deeper. But for that moment, I think we should look into how an operator, a user, does make use of Busby. Could you tell us a little bit about what is the typical way how an operator interacts with the system?
Sure. So there's a few different ways. Firstly, if it's just that they need to monitor the status of jobs in a workflow and maybe do some really basic interaction with them, more of a checking the status kind of approach, then we have what we call boards, which is our user interface, which is a bit like Trello, which you can see on the screen here. And basically, if you remember the previous screen where we showed the picture of the workflow configuration, each one of these strips on the screen here represents either one of the states which is in that workflow, or it could be a group of states. And you're able to configure that screen so that your operators can see the states that they need to see. So that allows you to view the quick status of things, and you can reprioritize them by dragging, you have the right permissions, etc. If you need to do a bit more manual interaction with the system, we have what we call workflow tasks. For example, one which includes a video player. So let's say in an example workflow where we have we've integrated with a QC engine, we've QC'd the video and it's failed on the auto QC engine, or it might have some warnings. So then we have a different view into the workflow system, which presents the user with a list of jobs, and they can click on one, and it will then, in that case, open a video player, because we would have transcoded the file into a low-res browse format, and it presents the video player along with a list of time codes, which it has parsed out of the QC report. And the user is able to click on each of those timecode entries and jump to that point in the video. And then they can then see if they approve or don't approve of the content. And then at the top there, where you can see those buttons, you're able to then select one of those buttons, and that moves the job into a different state in the workflow.
So, John,
Sorry, Karen.
So John, just to recap and for my understanding, if I have, for instance, a workflow like this, as we can see it here this very moment, what starts with something like registering, so this is probably the start of the workflow, then we had an automatic QC, then there was a supervisor check, afterwards another transcode, and then a registration in a third-party system or a failure path. That is how the workflow is orchestrated. And the user, from my understanding, so an operator would follow the processing in a dashboard like this. And I understood at certain points in the workflow, you can have like a probe where you expose a status of all the various workflow jobs in this kind of Trello board view. And then for the exception handling, you have the player application, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So in that diagram, basically when you're setting up your workflow, you're using that as the user interface that you can see in the screen with the diagram, and that's drag and drop. So you drag in your states, and there's a mixture of automatic and manual ones. So the manual ones are the ones with the picture of the hand, and the automatic ones are the ones with like the script or the cog icons. And what those things do is they automatically run the script when the job enters that workflow state. And in the Trello board style interface, you'll see a progress bar if there's a job in one of those states. Then it will automatically move on to the next job without you needing to refresh the browser. Sorry, it will move on to the next state. And then, exactly as you said, if you have, let's say, a supervisor check, that's when somebody needs to do something manually. So you're able to have a mixture of manual and automatic steps.
Yeah, so then this player application for the review. Here we've seen then the integration with transcoding, with quality control, with the manual user interface. This sounds to me like a typical workflow that we can find at file-based ingest, file exchange, all around archiving, post-production, broadcasting. Do you have other examples, also other third parties that are integrated in this area?
So in terms of other use cases, was not just around broadcast and post-production. There's a lot of use cases where Busby is involved in streaming applications. So let's say you might want to integrate with some OTT encoders or packages. That would be a good example where you, instead of having a file-based workflow like the one we've seen before, you may have something which is more of a streaming workflow based on a schedule, where you might have your job might be a schedule, again, might be triggered by that, but it will simply, one of the workflow steps will be to prepare your encoder, which would be to go and start up the event with the right encoding profile, and then it would be in like a I am live state, where the system is monitoring jobs that are in that state and checking that the encoder's working, and maybe checking CDN to make sure it's receiving the data. And then it might move forward onto the next step, which would be to close down the encoder, and then maybe you would trim the file or transcode it to a VOD platform afterwards. So it can also be used in a live environment as well as just a preparation for TX environment.
And these live environments, this example that you described just now was like an active orchestration of a streaming event. Does Busby also apply for monitoring, reporting, somehow interacting with systems to detect error situations?
Yes, it does. So another use case is for a large sports streaming app, which allows you to view loads of different sports around the world. We have put in a system which, as well as doing the orchestration and starting up and stopping of the event, it also monitors them during the event. So you can see here we have this alarm panel, just like a lamp and buzzer style control room monitoring system. But what that, each one of those buttons relates to an alarm. An alarm might be, for example, encoder 1 using too much CPU, or event 28 is missing French audio, or something like that. So constantly the system is polling third-party encoders or control equipment, or receiving messages from those devices and systems, and deciding whether there's any alarm conditions. And if there is, it will flag up in that panel that we just saw, and it might make a noise in the control room, or it might send a SMS or an email or something. And then when it detects that fault condition has gone away, the alarm will automatically be cleared out.
Can the operator somehow solve that problem? So does he has a possibility to interact with the system, or is the system automatically healing the situation?
That very much depends on the integration with the device or the service, and also how you configure it. So you can make it so that the system will try to automatically heal the problem, or it may just monitor to see when that problem has sorted itself out, or indeed it allows the operator to say, press a button to say, I'm dealing with this alarm, so the noise will cancel and it will go yellow. Then they will go away and fix the problem, and then they can come back to the panel and click on the button to clear the alarm, to say, no, that's dealt with. So you can configure it to your own use case, and as to whether you want the system to clear the alarm itself, or whether you want your operational staff to do that.
I see. And now, when we talk about this type of alarming, and you spoke about earlier that you are a software integrator, to what degree can you also connect and interact with hardware? You spoke about earlier about, let's say, the software takes too much CPU, but are you monitoring hardware equipment as well that we do have in media environments?
Yeah, that's correct. So we've got built-in drivers and software for controlling routers using protocols such as Quartz and general switcher protocol. We can integrate those straight into the bus, so that automatically gives you a wide range of different routers. We can control modular cards from the likes of Evertz and Grass Valley, and we can also connect up to hardware devices if they simply have an SNMP interface for monitoring and controlling. And a lot of the time, we've got quite a lot of experience in specialist little bits of controlling and monitoring. For example, sometimes we'll provide a little box, this is like a small Linux box, or the customer will provide it, because there may be a system which needs to be controlled over serial or RS-232, and we have protocols for connecting those devices and controlling those through Busby as well.
So we started off with looking into file-based workflows. Now we spoke quite a lot about monitoring, reporting, alarming, that things. And in the middle, you also mentioned the integration with schedules and reforming and so on. I would like to move in this direction one more time. So in a linear playout facility, how does Busby apply there in the middle of the playout automation, traffic systems, media asset management systems? For what is it good for?
So a lot of the time, if you take a broadcaster or a playout provider, you're going to go in there and you automatically know they're going to have a large mix of software and hardware from different vendors, because that's just the way it works. They've chosen best of breed things for each of their clients, or they've done a hardware and software refresh and they've replaced half the channels in one playout system, they've moved to another playout system or something like that. So you're going to have a large mix of different devices and services which need to be controlled and monitored. And it may not be that, in that case, Busby may not be controlling and monitoring the whole system, but it can also be really helpful when you've got a little bit of edge case processing which may apply to one or two channels. Let's say you've changed to a different automation system and you're unable to change the output from the traffic system. So we may simply have a little service which is just sitting there waiting for the schedules from the traffic system and converting them into the format for the automation system. And also, maybe in the reverse direction, we're going to take the as-run files and put them into the format that the traffic system needs. And we've also got another example, which was a customer who wanted a backup recorder for their VOD program. So we simply have a server which is constantly recording the video via SDI, and that service is also receiving the as-run files, and then it simply creates a player view, and it's already marked up on the timeline where the various programs have started and stopped during the day, so the user can click through them and then make a clip out of whatever they want. So there's lots of little examples of where it's doing little edge case handling of things which you can't quite do in the automation system or in the media management system. All those manufacturers, they're large manufacturers, they don't really want to get involved in writing a small bit of software. So sometimes where you bring in someone like us and we would help.
So you spoke about the video on demand, let's say video creation. What about the integration with the video on demand platform? So the actual push out to such presentation platforms. Typically we need more than just the video. There's also the need for metadata, pictures, and way more. Have you done projects in this area as well?
Yes, we have. We've done a couple in the past, and we're currently working on one now, where we will take in the linear schedule. We present that in, let's say, like a calendar view for the user to see. And what they're able to do is they're able to see, well, this series is going to be on these, based on some rules. You could automatically decide, well, this series is going to be on this VOD platform at this time. They can also then add and remove programs and series for that month. And then the system will then put those things into workflows and say, well, look, this has got all the required information for this platform, and we go and upload it. Or it may flag up an exception that a user needs to do something. Let's say it's missing a poster image or missing an audio file. Then there'll be a list of tasks that a user can do, and they can simply click on there and they can upload those files into there. Or it may integrate with a media asset management system or a production management system to go and pull out bits of metadata that are missing. Or often it's also integrating with third-party companies, that, for example, a dubbing house or a translation provider, to either tell them this job needs to be done, and it might send them an email with an XML file which they need to translate, or it might poll a third-party company for status of what's going on in their place as well.
John, let's talk a little bit about customers. You just started on this topic as you spoke about others than broadcasters, like dubbing houses and so on. Who are your customers?
Well, there's quite a large range. It's a lot of broadcasters and like playout providers, but there are also service providers such as post-production houses or translation or transcoding houses, where they do a specific role, but they still need to manage their jobs and their workloads and maybe provide statuses back to their customers. There's also some other customers which you wouldn't necessarily think are directly related to broadcast. For example, we've done something completely different for the British Horse Racing Association, where we've taken their archive of 10 years worth of multi-camera angle races and put that into an archive where they can browse and view all of that instantly in a web portal. And you could think, okay, well, why don't they just use a MAM system or a PAM system? They could, but a MAM system doesn't know about horse racing. And because we're a smallish company and we've got all the parts of our toolkit available, we're able to quite quickly and for a very decent price create this complete custom portal. This is just for them, and it knows about horse racing. Or for some customers, it also helps them if they want to develop their own system. You know, you can buy Busby, and they could have made that themselves using the toolkit as well.
So, from my understanding, Busby works best where it's about media handling or metadata file handling that is somehow related to media. But could you imagine that Busby is used in totally different use cases? I don't know, in communications or any other use case that are probably also applying at our customers. So, let's say different departments still in media facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, it obviously can help with scheduling and resource planning and things like that. But it's also used in a couple of examples which are in no way related to forecasting. For example, there is a company who's actually a call center operator, and they receive incoming calls and they have to relay messages to people. So we've created but what they were doing before is they were kind of manually typing out all the messages and sending them to the email addresses of the various people. So we've made a system which actually integrates with their telephone system, and when the operator answers the phone, they're presented with a screen which they just need to fill in the data, and then when they hang up the phone, that will get created into a job in the Busby workflow and go and do the various notifications that it needs to do.
So that also sounds like a customer can start with Busby in a certain area, let's say for one of the departments, and then he can grow with the software. How could that happen?
So, I mean, when you first get Busby, you only need to buy it's sold in a modular way. So you only need to buy the bits of the toolkit which you need to get started. So very often we start in and we go in and we help the customer create a little solution which is just a small thing on the edge, which is just helping out with a task. And sometimes it may just have even been a temporary task, like, well, we need to migrate from one system to another, and that system doesn't have a tool to do it. But during the process of that, they may have bought Busby and they got used to it, and they kind of get thinking, oh, well, you know, that could actually be useful in a different use case. And then they can simply buy any additional modules which they need to fulfill those tasks. So you're able to start small and grow the system as you need to.
So is that also reflected in the pricing model? So that means you spoke about modules. I assume every module has a price. Does it mean that a customer can also start small in terms of budget and then grow and automate more and more?
Yes, it does. So you can buy the toolkit price, just the base toolkit price is a pretty reasonable price for what it is. It's got a lot of built-in functionality out of the box. It includes the configuration management, the user authentication management, the workflow engine. Those things you get out of the box. And then let's say they want to have a special function or a new integration, then you can buy those modules separately. There are other options. For example, if you want to buy it to be on a single machine, or if you want to have a fully redundant system with several machines connected, those are also reflected in the price. So you can simply start with just what you need to get going and fulfill your project, and then you can buy additional capacity later on. You may also, quite an example case of that is when customers are moving to the cloud. So they may have an on-premise Busby system, but then they actually want to start moving some of their workflows into the cloud. So in that case, instead of buying a whole new Busby system, you can just buy like a node of Busby which you can run in the cloud, for example.
So as you are just triggering me, I need to ask this question. You spoke about connecting systems. That sounds to me like I can have one, I add another for redundancy, or I'm adding another one at a totally different place or different network or in the cloud. So is it that a Busby can grow to a larger network of automation servers?
Yeah, so it really depends. There's lots of ways you can do that. It's very flexible. One of the common ways is to build them as separate Busby systems in different locations. But when I say separate, they're only separated network-wise. They can then be, firstly, they can have all the same configuration, and then they can all join up with each other using what we call a zone trunk. And that's a single encrypted port tunnel between those systems. That also helps with things like, let's say your main system is in the cloud and you've got a couple of facilities where you need to control some hardware or some on-premise software. You can simply open up the ports on your cloud system, and those on-premise systems will connect into the cloud. So you don't need to, there's often problems in broadcast where we have the IT department say, well, that's not secure, we're not allowed to open the firewall, or they say we can do it, but it's going to take 6 months, and in the meantime, it's too late for the project. So that gets around that issue there by allowing you to connect those Busby systems together without needing to open up your firewalls.
John, have many, many thanks for sharing all this information and giving us an insight on how Busby could solve your and our customers' problems. It seems like it is really kind of can get a beast of interacting with lots of things in the ecosystems that we typically deal with. And I see that it might be of help for many of us. Thanks so much for joining us today.